Hello everyone, so welcome to part 2 about overview of advertisement management, and I want to talk about what is the impact of advertisement on the economy. And when I say the economy, I don't mean so much the economy in general, but I mean the economy of the business. So there are two major strategies that a company can follow in general, and that will affect the advertisement strategy that you will use. So a company can typically follow a differentiation strategy, which means that they're going to try to focus on their brand and try to show to the market why they are different from all the others, or they can follow a cost leadership, which basically means that they will focus on the relationship between cost and quality. In other words, they're going to try to offer the best quality that they can at that price, at the price range that they define. Now, both strategies are good, and it will depend on a lot of situations what strategy makes the most sense for your firm. So, in order to make the decision about that, you have to realize that there are three main aspects that will define if you should follow differentiation or cost leadership. The product itself, all right, what you're selling, the competition, and the consumer. Now, I'm not going to explain in this video them into detail, but for now, let's just accept that those are the two major strategies companies can follow, and therefore, this will also affect our advertisement strategy. What we're going to do now is to analyze different components, the 6 different components of advertisement and advertisement strategy when it comes to one strategy and the other. So the first category is advertisement. So what is the difference in advertisement for differentiation and cost leadership? Well, for differentiation, advertisement affects the consumer. They believe that advertisement affects the consumer preferences and tastes and changes product attributes and differentiates the product from the competitive offering. In other words, we state here that advertisement will change what the consumer prefers. And we see that, for example, with brands such as Starbucks, Amazon, and Apple. Through the years with their advertisement of their product, they change the consumer perception to the point where many consumers become loyal to the brand, even, for example, if we show them facts that a certain product or a certain service is better than the brand that they like. But that's the fact of differentiation because they feel emotionally connected to the brand. Now, when you have cost leadership, your advertisement tends to be more informative. So advertisement for cost leadership, we use it as to inform consumers about the product attributes and does not change the way that they value those attributes. So for example, if we're talking about dishwasher detergent or washing machine detergent like Skip and Teeth and all those. So all those brands, they are strong brands, but every time that you see advertisement, you tend to see advertisement there is very focused on what the product can do and about sales promotion to be able to sell that product or buy that product at a cheaper price. So one and the other, they are correct, but again, it depends a lot on the circumstance of the product, like I mentioned before. The next category is how is the consumer behavior different in one and the other? Well, when you follow a differentiation strategy, consumers become very brand loyal. They are less price sensitive, which means that there's a lower tendency for them to change from your brand to another just based on price. And they perceive that there are fewer substitutes for those brands. In other words, they believe that there are not so many available brands that substitute the brand that they like. But on cost leadership, the situation is very different. Consumers become much more price sensitive and they try to buy the best value. In other words, they try to, for the money that they spend, they want to get the best value possible. And only the relationship between price and quality will affect the elasticity of that product. In other words, only the relationship between price and quality will affect how much demand or how much the consumers want to buy of that product. In other words, it's much more focused on the price and the attributes of the product, while differentiation is much more focused on the brand and on the benefits that the product can give. The next category is barriers to entry. So barriers to enter the market. Now, If you have an industry that is very focused on differentiation, or you have a brand that is very focused on differentiation on a certain industry, then potential new businesses that want to enter that business, they will have to overcome the established brand loyalty and spend a lot of money on advertisement to try to change consumers' mind into what their brand is. Although sometimes we see that when we see that spending money in advertisement does not necessarily also mean the traditional advertisement. There are many brands that came in and created good products that were very focused more on word of mouth and on social media campaigns rather than actually on the traditional advertisement. And for example, the brand OnePlus or the brand Xiaomi are excellent examples of this. On the other hand, barriers to entering cost leadership. Now, industries that are very focused on cost leadership, what we tend to see here is that advertisement will make entry possible for many new brands because they can easily communicate the attributes to the consumer. Although what we tend to see in these situations is whenever there's new entrants in the market, all right, that is very cost leadership style, brands that are already established tend to do much more advertisement to try to eliminate the influence of those new brands. This happens a lot in the beer industry. So for example, whenever a new beer tries to enter a specific market, you're going to see that the brands that are well established in that market suddenly increase the amount of advertisement that they do in order to try to compensate for the advertisement that this new brand is trying to make, and therefore, let's say, eliminate this new entrant right from the start. In terms of industry structure and market power, now what we see is that industries that are very focused in differentiation, the firms are insulated from market competition and potential rivals. In other words, brands offer extra protection. If you wish, it's like a shield for that brand. And there's a concentration increase, leaving firms with more discretionary power. In other words, when a brand is strong, they will have their own image inside an industry, and many of the competitors will actually think twice before trying to enter that market or trying to change that industry. Rather, what they will try to do is to find a corner or a spot in that industry that is not being properly met, and their brand will try to establish themselves there. So it's a little bit like trying to see that you're filling an industry with different types of objects, and each object will try to find its own position in a certain container. Now in the beginning there's going to be more and more. You shake the box and the objects eventually will find their own space within it, and it's a little bit like that. All right, so on the other hand, if you have an industry that is very dominated by cost leadership, then consumers will tend to compare the competitive offerings more easily, and competitive rivalry is increased. In other words, in industry with cost leadership, we tend to see much more competition and therefore much more comparison between products and services by the consumers, like we saw, for example, for the restaurant industry. So what will happen here is that efficient firms will remain while new entrants appear, and the effect on concentration is still ambiguous. We don't know, for example, if this fact makes competition worse or better, because at the end of the day what will happen is that the businesses that are the most efficient, that use their money and their resources the best, are the ones that will survive. And we saw this after 2008, the financial crisis. Many airlines went bankrupt because they were not efficient. In terms of market conduct, in other words, how firms behave in the market, well, if you go with the differentiation strategy, most firms can charge higher prices and are not as likely to compete on quality or price dimensions. Here, innovation will tend to be more reduced, and we see that on brands that are very well established that went with differentiation. We would assume that differentiation brands would be more innovative, but that's actually not the case. We see, for example, Starbucks did not have any major innovations for over 10 years, and the same thing can be said, for example, of brands such as Apple. Apple has such a strong loyal base that in a way they kind of stopped innovative. innovation. I remember the old times of Apple when you had the iPod. Some years later you would have the iPhone, the iPad, and you get all these products that are different from each other, that there was no offering in the market innovating. Nowadays Apple decided to go in a more safe strategy, and I know they're still very profitable, therefore obviously their strategy is working. But it is interesting to see that companies that become very focused on their brand tend to innovate less. In cost leadership, we have more informed consumers, and therefore they put a lot of pressure on firms to lower their prices to improve the quality. So in a way, because of this intense competition, because of this intense demand, innovation grows in cost leadership strategies via the new entrants, because there's normally new competitors coming into the market. Then what happens? You have to keep innovating in order to survive. The next one is market performance. Now, in terms of market performance differentiation, we see that high prices and excessive profits occur to advertisers and give them even more incentive to advertise their product. The output is restricted compared to the conditions of perfect competition. In other words, we see that in differentiation, because we can charge higher prices, then we spend much more money in advertisement when you focus on your brand. If you want to keep your brand strong, you have to spend money in advertisement, you have to spend money communicating your brand. But at the same time, because you spend so much money on it, that's money that does not go into research and development or customer care. So indeed, there is a good side and a bad side to differentiation, and it will lead to a good market performance, but it will have some costs. On the other hand, cost leadership. Industry's prices are decreased, and the effect on profits due to increased competition and increased efficiency is ambiguous. In other words, what we mean here is that we really cannot give a one recipe that it always goes up or it always goes down. In cost leadership, because there's much more variables involved, it's harder to control, and sometimes more competition can actually lead to more profits in the industry. So to summarize, we see that the two major strategies that we have, differentiation and cost leadership, make the two markets very different for advertisers. A differentiation strategy is focused on much more intense advertisement, focused on making the brand connect emotionally with the consumer and showing that your brand is very different from all the others and there is no competition. But in cost efficiency, what we see is that advertisement has to be much more pragmatic in a way. It has to be informative, and it has to convince the consumers not so much emotionally, but through logics. Because there's so much competition all the time, the company must also evolve. And both strategies can be very successful and very interesting for advertisers. But we do see is that a lot of times in one industry you can have both strategies that are competing against each other, and both of them can work in the same industry. Thank you very much for watching the video. Let me know if you enjoy it, and if you have any questions, leave a comment on the section below and I'll answer it as soon as I can.